Africa divided in Berlin. In 1884, European powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa like pieces on a board, but not a single African was invited to speak for their land. The borders drawn in that room still fuel conflict, poverty, and division today. Imagine strangers dividing your house and giving each room away without asking you. That is what happened to an entire continent. In 1884, representatives from 14 European nations met in Berlin under the guidance of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck of Germany. Their purpose was not peace, not fairness, and certainly not partnership. It was a scramble for Africa's land, people, and resources. This meeting, known as the Berlin Conference, marked the official partitioning of Africa. No African leader was invited. No community had a voice. Europeans simply redrew maps and claimed territories. The promise of civilization and trade was used to justify exploitation. 10 key points. 1. Why the conference happened. The late 19th century was the peak of imperial ambition. Industrialization in Europe created a hunger for raw materials like rubber, ivory, gold, and palm oil. Africa was rich in resources, but politically fragmented. To avoid wars among themselves, European nations gathered in Berlin to formalize the scramble for Africa. The conference was not about African development. It was about dividing spoils among empires. The so-called civilizing mission was only a mask for economic greed and political rivalry. Who attended 14 nations participated, including Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, then a United Kingdom, Turkey, then the Ottoman Empire, and the United States of America. The United States was invited, but played a minimal role. The African continent, however, was completely excluded. No king, no chief, no representative stood in the room to defend their people's future. This silence was intentional. The Europeans considered Africans incapable of diplomacy or decision-making. It was an early example of international politics conducted at the expense of those most affected. 1. The role of Otto von Bismarck. Chancellor Otto von Bismarck of Germany hosted the conference. His goal was to position Germany as a mediator between rival powers, especially Britain and France. Bismarck himself was not deeply invested in colonization, but he saw the conference as a way to enhance Germany's prestige in Europe. Ironically, Germany left the meeting with colonies in modern Namibia, Tanzania, and Cameroon. Bismarck's political game changed the future of millions of Africans, even though Germany later abandoned most of its colonies after World War I. 1. The principle of effective occupation. One major outcome of the conference was the principle of effective occupation. This rule stated that a European power could only claim a territory if it had established control through treaties, soldiers, or administration. On paper, it seemed like an orderly system. In practice, it encouraged a violent race to occupy African lands as quickly as possible. This principle justified conquest, the manipulation of chiefs, and widespread military campaigns. 2. Ignoring African realities. The Europeans drew borders with little knowledge of Africa's ethnic, cultural, or geographic realities. They cut across kingdoms, split ethnic groups, and forced enemies into one colony. For example, the Yoruba and Hausa in Nigeria were merged under British rule, while the Somali people were divided among 5 different territories. These artificial borders created tensions that later erupted into civil wars and remain unresolved today. The map was neat for Europe, but destructive for Africa. 3. Congo and King Leopold II. Perhaps the most infamous outcome was the personal claim of King Leopold II of Belgium over the Congo Free State. Unlike other colonies, Congo was not given to a nation, but to one man. Leopold promised to end slavery and promote trade. Instead, he built one of the most brutal regimes in history. Millions of Congolese died from forced labor mutilations and famine under Leopold's rule. The Berlin Conference gave him international legitimacy to carry out atrocities. Under King Leopold II's rule of the Congo Free State, 1885-1908, historians estimate that around 10 million Africans died from forced labor, famine, disease, and brutal punishments such as mutilations. Some scholars argue the number could be lower, around 5 million, while others suggest it may have been over 10 million. The difficulty comes from poor record-keeping, but there is agreement that Leopold's regime was one of the most brutal in colonial history. 1. The myth of civilization. Europeans justified colonization by claiming they were bringing civilization, Christianity, and modern trade. They spoke of building schools, roads, and governance. In reality, these promises were tools of propaganda. The infrastructure built often served only to extract resources, such as railways leading to ports or roads leading to mines. Education was limited and often designed to produce laborers, not leaders. The rhetoric of civilization masked an agenda of extraction and exploitation. 4. Economic consequences. Africa became a supplier of raw materials and a market for European goods. Cash crops like cocoa, coffee, and cotton were imposed, replacing diverse local farming. African economies were reshaped to serve European industries, creating dependency that persists today. The continent's resources funded European growth, while Africans saw little benefit. This one-sided economic arrangement is a key reason why African nations entered independence with fragile economies. 5. Political and social impact. Colonial governments dismantled traditional leadership and imposed foreign systems. Chiefs who resisted were replaced with those loyal to colonial powers. Missionary schools and military posts spread European influence. This destroyed many indigenous governance structures and cultural practices. Social hierarchies were redefined, often privileging groups that cooperated with colonizers. These divisions deepened mistrust between communities and set the stage for ethnic conflict after independence. 6. Lasting legacy. The Berlin Conference ended in 1885, but its consequences continue today. Borders drawn in Berlin remain the official national boundaries of African states. Many conflicts from Nigeria's Biafra War to Sudan's divisions trace back to these arbitrary lines. The economic imbalance created by colonial extraction still challenges African economies. Politically, many nations struggle with systems imposed by colonizers. The Berlin Conference was not just a historical event. It is a shadow that still falls over Africa. History is not distant. The decisions made in a Berlin conference room in 1884 still shape Africa's present. Border conflicts and economies carry the fingerprints of that meeting. The Berlin Conference and partition of Africa has been thoroughly examined by historians and leading academic institutions such as Encyclopaedia Britannica 2025, which provides an authoritative overview of the conference and its long-term consequences. Payne Chu and Ricard Huguet 2025, in the American Political Science Review, analyze how pre-colonial states and geography shaped the drawing of colonial borders, highlighting how decisions taken in Berlin created lasting divisions that still influence African politics. Additional scholarly discussion appears in contemporary research published on ResearchGate 2025, which explores the impact of the Berlin Conference on the economic and political development of the East African community. What do you think Africa could have been stronger today without the Berlin Conference? This history is shared solely for educational purposes with no intention to cause division or hatred. The aim is to learn from the past so we can build a better future. Share your thoughts below and subscribe to the Summary Cave for more hidden history that shapes the world we live in.